Find something very unintuitive but true, which explains a lot of problems in society, and frame it dramatically, and then you can have fun with conspiracism without spreading misinformation, Destiny. Oh, maybe. I think the two biggest things, I think the biggest, like, semi-conspiratorial thing, that it seems insane for me, but I think it perfectly explains everything. We should spend more days, like, building this out, I guess, is, like, the idea that the American political system actually functions so unbelievably well, and that might be the biggest problem, that lobbying isn't really that big of a problem. Voter suppression is almost negligible. None of that shit really matters. What matters is that, like, people vote for who they want, and certain types of people vote, and that's, like, the explaining force behind 95% of our political system. And it makes everything in our political system, any things that seem weird, like, how can this be, or how is this? It's like, oh yeah, now that all makes sense if I view it through that lens. Can you talk more about how voter suppression isn't a problem? I think there have been studies done, and the idea that there was at the very least one that we read. I'm too lazy to go find it. But, like, if you trace back, like, all of the... There was at least one study posted where they tried to find, like, the effects of voter suppression or whatever in different states, and it was just, like, a wash. This is a good thing. How to figure out how our brains work. Okay, this is something to remember. I mention this a lot. It always sounds like some shit you hear in movies or whatever. It's not supposed to sound like that. This is a very true thing. Sometimes what people say is one thing, it's whatever, but sometimes what they don't say and what they should say but they don't say is more important than what they do say, right? So let me explain how I can understand this. So this guy made a post saying, Destiny saying that voter suppression does nothing is just dumb and arrogant, okay? Now, this is Godkiller99. I think he's a big fan of mine because I think he posts my shit on LSF a lot. But he also gets really ass mad when I say things like this, and he also gets really mad when I say misinformation is worse on the, or is equally bad on the left and right. He gets really mad. So let's read his post. Today on stream, he said this regarding voter suppression. This is something he's repeated a bunch of times in different ways. Now, it's probably true that if someone is very dedicated to vote, they'll find a way, but voter suppression isn't meant to stop those kind of people. The average person doesn't care that much about politics. It's meant to stop those who are dedicated and won't bother if you put enough of a barrier to stop them. Hey, Dan. So, a new survey from The Atlantic and the Public Religion Research Institute showed that blacks and Hispanic citizens are more likely than whites to face barriers at the polls and to fear the future erosion of their... Okay, so this might be true that they do that. Okay. It's also good to note that voter suppression is one strategy used in conjunction with others and will not have dramatic impacts in terms of raw numbers on its own. But what you need to remember is that at places where the vote is close, where it's close, it can be enough, which is why Republicans did this in Georgia after their loss. Also, it does tend to disproportionately target minority voters. A dead simple algorithm reviews the true toll of voter ID laws. Now, let's say you dismiss all this. Here's a question that should really perplex you. If voter suppression does nothing, why are Republicans so hell-bent on spending energy and political capital on enacting it and Democrats on fighting it, along with Biden repeating so often that this is the new Jim Crow? Now, Destiny showed that he talked about... now, Destiny should know about this, considering he talked about the North Carolina case with our dear friend Tonka back in the days. Okay, so we can ignore the rest of this, okay? If somebody comes at me and they say, I know for a fact that you were dead wrong about this, and I'm like, okay, well, what do you got? And then I get something where 90% of the post is conjecture, like shit that doesn't matter, then it makes me wonder. It's like, okay, I know your motivation for posting this. You are motivated by the fact that you think you are incredibly right and I am incredibly wrong. So you have every motivation. You have the inclination, you've got the capability, you've got the everything right here to post a whole bunch of information demonstrating that I'm wrong. Where are all these studies showing that voter suppression, because if it was the case that voter suppression, because this is what I looked for, because somebody challenged me on this before and I went searching for it, I was like, wait, what the fuck? Where is all the research showing voter suppression is like suppressing the vote, is having this impact here, or is having this impact there, right? These studies like don't really exist. And even in terms of this post, we have like, I think this thing might talk about, we've read something before where it's like different people might be turned off by different amounts. Like once you put an extreme amount, like 6 or 7 hours of the polls, people might not go to that. But then we get stuff like, well, it does target minorities. You know, Republicans did try to put voter laws here, blah, blah, blah. But like the evidence for, and again, maybe we'll spend a day doing this. I think I might have read most of this off stream because I was just curious. The idea that there's all this research out there that shows that voter suppression is a really big thing that impacts like people going to vote. It's like if voter suppression can be like have an impact on like a 1 to 100 thing, the impact would be like 5. And then if like enthusiasm for the election could have an impact on 1 to 100, that would be like 100. The voter suppression stuff is just so insignificant compared to everything else. And I remember the first time that this popped into my brain, I remember I made a big deal about this a lot on stream. I think the first time this popped into my brain was when the primaries were happening in, I think it was South Carolina. Somebody can go find this. This is true. Because I quote this a lot, but if it's not true, that would suck. But I want to say in South Carolina, I think it was 3 times as many people voted in that, not 3%, not 30%, 3 times as many people, I think, voted in that primary compared to the one before. It was like a 300% increase. And it's like, if that many more people voted, did the laws change that much? There's no way, right? So yeah, it seems like it's just not that big a deal. So Republicans are wasting time in political capital. So I think I read something by David Shore, or it was a 538 post. I'd have to go back. But so that's like the next question. So the next question is, why do people spend so much time on this issue if it's not really that important? And I think the theory that he came up with was that if your voters feel like it's important, you're going to fixate on it and focus on it because then it becomes like a talking point for good public policy. But then I think the next thing was, it might be the case that maybe voter suppression does actually suppress some of the vote, but when you enact this form of voter suppression, you end up galvanizing the opposition so much that they overcome it anyway because they're so irritated about it. But yeah, I don't know. It was really interesting. You might have read this before, but it makes a similar point. Oh, this has to do with high voter turnout. So I've repeated this talking point so many times. I used to, but I don't anymore. High voter turnout is always good for Democrats. Republicans always rely on suppressing the vote. The more people that vote, the better it is for Democrats. I used to say this all the time. It's just totally not true. It's not true at all. The last election absolutely proved it as well, where you get like way more people voting. And it wasn't necessarily better for Democrats in a whole bunch of different areas. That wasn't true at all. Political parties do not operate with perfect information. Do people really think the Democrats do 100% the correct thing? Yeah, sure. Yeah, they don't. They also, that's true as well. Yeah, that's probably like my most controversial position. But the issue I find is, how do you stumble upon all these articles and resources to challenge conventional opinions on political topics like voter suppression? I don't know. I think I usually just go Googling looking for stuff. Could I find it? So like one thing I remember searching for was does mail-in ballot help Democrat, Republican? I think this is this is probably something I've searched for before. And I've tried to find research on this. Oh, this actually might have even been an exact order in the past. I don't remember. Do Republicans or Democrats benefit from mail-in voting? It turns out neither, but these elections could change everything. I think this article goes through some of the research in terms of like who gets, you can increase the turnout, but it tends to not really benefit one side or the other. They found that in presidential and midterm general elections between 1996 and 2018, switching to all-mail voting increased the percentage of residents who voted by 1.8 to 2.9%. They report today in Science Advances. When it came to the Democratic share of the vote, they found a tiny uptick in the share of votes that went to Democratic candidates for Congress, governor, and president, approximately 0.7%. But the difference was so small that the margin of statistical error means it's possible there was no effect at all. There might be a teensy tiny effect on Democratic turnout. One thing that I keep coming back to in every article that I read over and over and over again, though, is voter interest. How much do people care about what's at stake? I think a big red pill, so to speak, is looking at spending in elections also, like that SSC article about how little is spent, but for ballot initiatives in California, getting initiative on the ballot is like $3 million on average, much less in other states. Lots of states that are net favorable to legalizing marijuana. Getting on the ballot would cost only several $100,000 to $2 million, and it'd be almost guaranteed to pass. So why doesn't it happen? It's just weird. I don't know if it would be guaranteed to pass in a lot of states. I'm not sure about that all the time. So what the conclusions you draw from this, that voter suppression is just not worth talking about, or that stuff like the North Carolina voter ID laws aren't a big deal. Yeah, so like the conclusion is that like, who cares about like voter suppression or like voter registration? Like the big takeaway that I got from all of this is, if there is an election and people care about it, they're going to vote. That's what it came from, basically. If there's an election coming up and people really care about it, you're going to see voters. And that getting people excited for an election and getting people to care about an election is by far and away the most absolute important thing you can do, is getting people to care about an election and getting people to go vote. That like, there's not all these like people being like, oh, I tried to vote, but I was voter suppressed or anything like that. Or like, oh, I didn't have the right ID. You know, even though these things should be avoided for a variety of reasons, sure. But it's just, I don't think it's the driving impact behind like some, like, oh, the gerrymandering, fucked us. And oh no, it was the voter suppression and the voter IDs. And that's why we lost. Like, no, it's because people just didn't give a fuck. People just didn't care enough to come out for this election. That's what happened. Have you heard that making voting easier to do may not benefit Democrats as much as some people make it out to be the magic fix? Yeah, I think that's what this science study that these people are referencing said, basically, that like increase that might actually, this might have just been for mail-in ballots, but we can say like, does increased turnout help Democrats or Republicans? I'm pretty sure I've looked up this too. I think a lot of lefties just shut off their brains as long as you mention voter suppression not being that relevant. Yeah, of course. Wouldn't gerrymandering and stuff still account for stupid results like Dems winning 55% of the vote, but not a majority in the House? Well, like, here's the problem with gerrymandering, okay? And this is like, I think I watched one video on this after somebody, I think it was after the Ethan Hurst guy, the Politics is for Power author, he challenged me on it. He asked me a question that I'd never thought of before. And he was like, well, how would you gerrymander fairly? And then he made the second argument, and he said, if you actually drew real districts, if you actually drew districts how they should be drawn, Democrats would, like, in some places, would never win an election again. And it was like, well, what do you mean by that? And that's because liberals tend to be way more congested. Liberals tend to live together way more than conservatives do. So if you drew real districts, real fair districts, then you're going to have, like, these 90% blue districts everywhere. So really, in order to have liberals have a chance to win elections, you kind of need to gerrymander in an unfair way. So like even the whole idea of like, what is a fair district? How do you draw fair districts? Even that question is inherently normatively loaded. It's a big moral question. Like, well, fuck, like what do we, it's not like an easy, okay. So someone in Twitch chat said, Destiny, what is a real fair district? Yeah, that's a good question. What is it? What is a fair district? You know, who knows? Like, it's difficult. Increasing voter interest is not a trivial problem to solve. Absolutely true. To get people interested in elections is very difficult. That is true. If all the liberals live together, doesn't that mean all the conservatives do as well? No, not necessarily, because I think like what happens is I think that the way that it tends to look is like if liberals are blue and conservatives are red, what'll happen is very, very, very few conservatives will live like inside like these city areas, but they'll be spread out like all around these rural parts on the outside. There'll be a few in the city, but not many. So what happens is like when you start drawing districts, like, okay, well, this is a fair district. This is a fair district. This is what happens is you're like, okay, well, this is like 90% blue. This is like 85% blue. You're getting fucked by your gerrymander. And then when we try to reach out, it's like, okay, well, how do we draw like these districts? It's like, okay, well, this is like 65% red, right? We'll draw this here. This is like 60% red. You know, we might have like a really red one here. And then we come over here. This is like 55% red. This is like the problem that you run into when you try to draw districts. So it's like, okay, well, fuck. Well, hold on. Well, now this is bullshit. Since all the liberals live together, if we draw districts fairly, like how a few city blocks ago or whatever, well, now we're fucked. We can't win any election ever because we're not spread out enough, you know? This is bullshit. Well, so now it's like, okay, well, fuck. Well, how do you draw a district that's fair, meaning it like represents like a real piece of like geography, but also like isn't like politically fucked? You know, you kind of have to like, if you're drawing as a liberal, it's like, okay, well, I need to cut off a huge chunk of like libs here, and then I have to like try to get all these conservatives in to get this like a 55% blue district. So I have to start cutting out and carving out these really weird districts, or else I can't win elections anymore, right? So it's like, it's really, really, really weird. It's super fucked. It's difficult. I don't know what the right answer is there. It's a really difficult problem to solve. It almost makes me think districting is just a bad idea, maybe, but I don't know what the alternative even would be. The problem with voter suppression stuff is that in states like Georgia are enacting states shit like this, Secretary of State is supposed to oversee the kind of election can be replaced by legislature, replace the Secretary of State. Okay. The issue is that all gerrymandering is bad, or that sometimes it's been used to increase political power. Well, the problem is, I don't know how do you fix gerrymandering? That's a hard one to do, you know? The current congressional map doesn't favor Dems, though. If it was drawn by a compactness algorithm, the overall lean would be the same. What do you mean by compactness algorithm? Or can you explain what that means? Much Ado About Nothing, an empirical assessment of the Georgia voter identification statute. This is published July 25th of this year. Voter ID policies, especially those of the photo ID variety, have been hotly contested over the last few years. The primary concern surrounding these statutes amounts to lower turnout, especially among certain groups in the electorate, such as racial/ethnic minorities. In 2007, the way was cleared for Georgia to implement a new statute requiring registrants to present a government-issued photo ID to vote. Using population data on registrants from 2 election cycles, coupled with information on a subgroup of registrants known to lack photo ID, we conducted policy impact analysis of the Georgia voter ID law. We find that the new law did produce a suppression effect among those registrants lacking proper ID. Substantively, the law lowered turnout by about 0.4 of a percentage point in 2008. However, we find no empirical evidence to suggest that there is a racial or ethnic component to this suppression effect. What about party effect? Lower turnout by 0.4 of a percentage point. Jesus. Example of crazy Illinois gerrymandering that does the slicing thing using Chicago. So anyway, this map has 2 black majority, 1 Hispanic majority, and 1 black plurality district. Just like the current, all the districts are around Biden plus 10. Oh, this is the slicing thing. Oh, nice. So it actually does occur just like this. I don't know if this happens in other cities too, but yeah. What if there's an upper limit on the number of people in a given district? That way, more condensed liberal districts are geographically smaller, but just as numerous as geographically larger. The problem is how diverse a district is. If you have a ton of diversity in conservative districts in terms of there like some Democrats everywhere, but you have no diversity in liberal districts and they're all liberals or Democrats, then you're going to get fucked when it comes to gerrymandering. You're going to get fucked. You're always going to lose elections. Compactness is in districts that aren't squigglies like the Illinois pick you just saw. Oh. Is this district map real? What the fuck are these states that have like, Jesus. Computer drawn map to optimize compactness. Wow. I guess there's like 12 people that live up here, huh? It makes sense. They only have 1 house seat. Yeah, I guess because Nebraska has 3.